this election is seen as so consequential, not just for the US, but for the rest of the world. I mean, the US is still a significant economy globally and significant player in security, geopolitics, and, business and finance. And so where does it not matter? We know that people are watching it closely all over. We know that governments and officials are, thinking already what the outcome either way might mean for them in their countries in Europe, in Asia, and beyond. Whether they're adversaries of the US, they consider themselves an adversary or consider themselves an ally. We know that alike they're looking to see what this means for them, because if you're an ally of the US and you're thinking about Donald Trump perhaps getting back into the White House and you're in Europe, you're thinking not just about the trade relationship and how that might change, because he obviously might put tariffs so that, things will get more tense either way. But what does it mean, obviously, for the big conflict on Europe's doorstep, which is the conflict in Ukraine? If you're in the Middle East, obviously you're thinking about what that might mean for all the chessboard there, including the conflict that we're seeing inside Gaza, but also the relationships between those countries, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and so on. If you're in Asia, you're thinking very much, obviously, about the trade and investment climate. But if you're a country like Japan or Korea that's been quite reliant on the US for defense support, what does that mean going forward, potentially, as China becomes more assertive in the region? And if it's Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, how much of a difference does that make? Certainly, Donald Trump has been very forceful with some of his promises or what he says he thinks he'll do if he gets back in office. But either way, whoever's in the White House come early next year is going to be a much more protectionist administration, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump.
I feel like there's, to some extent, a degree of continuity between what Harris and Biden would do and versus if Trump gets in. And surely it's more obvious what's going to happen in terms of the impact on Ukraine of a Trump presidency than the impact on the Middle East, the war there. What do we know about how the situation specifically in Gaza would change if it's Donald Trump?
Well, Gaza is interesting because, as you say, Kamala Harris has largely echoed the policies of Joe Biden when it comes to that conflict. She's been a little bit firmer on things like the humanitarian crisis that's been going on in Gaza and increasingly in Lebanon also. But it's also a question of how much clout, arguably, any US administration has when it comes to Israel in influencing their decisions. Donald Trump, of course, would say that he's got a personal relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu that he can lean on. Is he a fan of the conflict? He doesn't seem particularly to be, but he wants Israel perhaps to speed up, as he said before, and wrap things up, if he can wrap up a conflict in quick succession. But does he, would he stop supporting Israel? Very unlikely. So you might see shades of change if it's Kamala Harris, but as you say, the big change could be if it's Donald Trump.
What could a delayed or a disputed result in this election mean for the rest of the world?
Well, obviously, there's a big question of what it means for the US itself. But as you say, the rest of the world also, because if you have a protracted delay in the result, if you have, protracted legal cases or worse in the US, when you have a vacuum, things come into that. And the question is, what would happen if there is a bit of a dispute or a power vacuum in the US for any length of time, and do other countries take advantage of that? We've seen already the sense that the US being very preoccupied with politics this year. Countries say, well, I can try things I might not have tried a year ago because I might be able to get away with it. And so you could see perhaps that emboldening Vladimir Putin even further in Ukraine. He already seems to sense he has the advantage there. Does it change the dynamic again in the Middle East? Or does a country like China say, well, hang on, I could probably, do some things here in the region, pushing, again, their agenda on their periphery, be it with places like Taiwan or in the South China Sea, because the US is not going to be in a position really to organise itself against us in that moment. So, in the absence of the US playing the role that it's played for many years, even if it's a short-term disruption, we could see something there.